Under the relentless heat of the Egyptian desert, I stood on the edge of the precipice of history. Into the newly excavated tomb of an unnamed pharaoh loomed over me like a dark maw ready to swallow the sun. My name is Jonathan, an archaeologist by trade, and I was about to plunge into the depths of a past that had remained untouched for thousands of years by the sands of time and the breath of the living. The wind howled, carrying whispers of ancient curses and the heavy odor of forgotten tombs. Around me, the crew exchanged nervous glances, their eyes reflecting a kaleidoscope of torchlight and awe. We had all heard the stories, tales of explorers driven mad by unseen horrors, of crypts that guarded themselves with more than stone and silence. And yet here we were, driven by an unquenchable thirst for knowledge, or perhaps a secret desire to encounter the unexplainable. As we crossed the threshold, the heaviness of the air changed, thick with the dust of centuries and the palpable presence of something ancient, watching and waiting. The hieroglyphics that adorned the entrance to the tomb spoke of glory and eternity, but also warned of the presence of a guardian, a sentinel connected to the pharaoh's rest, an entity that must not be disturbed. Despite the anxiety that tormented me from within, I took the first step into the darkness, and the light of our torches cast long, dancing shadows on the walls, as if the carvings themselves had come to life to join our march into the abyss. The story of Pharaoh's last dream was unfolding before us, and little did we know that we were not mere readers, but unwitting heroes woven into its tapestry.
The heavy stone door closed behind us with an ominous thud, sealing away the scorching sun and leaving us enveloped in the cool, stagnant air of the tomb. It was a silence so profound it seemed to absorb the very sound of our breaths. The beams of our torches flickered against the ancient walls, revealing the vibrant colors of frescoes untouched by time, depicting the pharaoh's journey to the afterlife, a passage we were now tracing with our own tentative steps.
My team spread out, their shadows mingling with the painted figures on the walls. The tomb was a gallery of the past, each relic an inscription a testament to the pharaoh's might and the god's favor. Yet, the further we delved, the more the atmosphere tightened around us, as if the very air was warning us to tread no further. It started with a whisper, so faint, I thought it was the wind's work. But there was no wind here in the bowels of the earth. The whisper grew, a cacophony of voices that seemed to rise from the very stones beneath our feet, speaking in a language that had not graced the lips of the living for centuries. The team cast me looks of uncertainty, but I urged them on, attributing the sounds to the tricks of an old, settling structure. Then came the shadows. They were not like those cast by our torches, these moved with purpose, darting between the crypt's corners, always just slipping out of sight when looked upon directly. A chill that had nothing to do with the tomb's temperature crept up my spine, and then, without warning, our translator, Sarah, vanished. One moment she was beside me, her voice raised in excitement as she deciphered an inscription about the Guardian's eternal vigil. The next she was gone as if swallowed by the very words she read. Her disappearance cast a pall over the group, igniting a primal fear that perhaps the tales we had scoffed at were rooted in a dark reality. We called her name, our voices growing frantic as they bounced off the walls, returning to us distorted and foreign. The tomb seemed to be closing in on us, the eyes of the painted figures watching, the whispers growing louder. In that moment, I realized that the darkness was more than the absence of light. It was a presence that lived within these walls, a keeper of secrets that we had foolishly sought to uncover. The pharaoh's final resting place held a truth far more terrifying than the obscurity of forgotten history. It harbored a guardian that was very much alive, and we had trespassed in its domain. In the oppressive silence left by Sarah's disappearance, the tomb's secrets began to unravel before me like threads from an ancient tapestry. Each chamber revealed more of the pharaoh's narrative, yet the texts and artifacts twisted into a darker tale, the pharaoh's obsession with eternal life and the lengths to which he went to guard his slumber. Our lights flickered over a series of murals that depicted the pharaoh's journey not just through the afterlife, but his dealings with forbidden magic, his pact with a deity darker than the night sky above. I felt the weight of the ancient eyes upon us, watching from the murals, their expressions a mixture of warning and woe. The tomb itself seemed to be a living entity, breathing and shifting subtly as we moved through its innards. Hallways stretched longer than physics would allow, rooms looped back upon themselves in impossible geometry. It was as though the structure was reshaping, reacting to our intrusion, or perhaps it was guiding us, herding us towards an inevitable conclusion. As the cryptic hieroglyphs became clearer under my feverish study, I felt a creeping realization of our predicament. The pharaoh had not only secured a guardian for his tomb, but he had become one with it, his spirit enmeshed within the very walls that encased his sarcophagus. The ancient ruler had not left his fate to the passage of time, he had taken it into his own deathly hands. My musings were cut short by a scream that echoed through the labyrinthine corridors. It was Robert, our geologist, his voice carrying the unmistakable timbre of sheer terror. We found him in an antechamber, collapsed against a wall, his face white as the desert sands outside. Before him stood an opening that had not been there before, a dark maw in the wall that exhaled a cold, ancient breath. He babbled of seeing a figure within the stones, of eyes that glowed with malice and a whisper that promised death. As his words tumbled out, the temperature dropped, and the torches sputtered as if a great breath had tried to snuff them out. The sense of dread that hung over us now had form and substance. It was a shadow that clung to our every step, a whisper that promised we were walking deeper into our own graves. The guardian of the tomb was no longer just a tale to be studied, but a reality to be feared. It was here with us, its presence woven into the very air we breathed, its curse a tangible shroud that threatened to suffocate us in the darkness of the Pharaoh's ambition. The question of whether to proceed was answered by the tomb itself, as the walls began to shift once more, the path behind us obscured by falling stone and dust. There was no way back, only forward, into the heart of the Pharaoh's dark legacy. Surrounded by the suffocating walls of the ancient tomb, we were left with no choice but to venture deeper into the Pharaoh's crypt. The air grew denser, as if saturated with the dust of millennia, and every breath we took was a laborious task, filled with the weight of the dead. Our path led us to the heart of the tomb, a grand chamber adorned with opulent treasures that gleamed dully in our torchlight, mocking our mortal desires with their untouched splendor. And there, in the center of this sepulchral treasury, stood the sarcophagus of the Pharaoh, a monument to his might and his curse. As we approached, the air shifted, charged with an electric current that raised the hairs on the back of my neck. A figure materialized before us, as if woven from the shadows themselves, an amalgam of the ethereal and the corporeal, its form both fluid and solid, shifting between dimensions. The guardian's eyes were like twin suns set into a face of darkness, and its gaze held the abyss of eternity. It spoke, its voice a symphony of whispers that seemed to come from the walls, the artifacts, from within our very minds. It spoke of the Pharaoh's will, his need to protect the sanctity of his eternal slumber, and the punishment that awaited those who dared to transgress. I realized then that the guardian was not merely a sentinel, it was an extension of the Pharaoh's own will, a manifestation of his fearsome grip on the afterlife. It was bound to the crypt as much as the crypt was bound to it, a symbiotic relationship forged from the Pharaoh's obsession and the dark magic he had employed. The team stood paralyzed, caught between the desire to flee and the impossibility of escape. The guardian moved among us, its presence oppressive, an unspoken threat lingering in its every gesture. It was then I understood, the Pharaoh had not only trapped himself within these walls, he had trapped the essence of life itself, a life force that now fed the guardian. Confronted with the realization that the guardian would not let us leave, a plan began to form in my desperate mind. I would offer myself to the guardian, a trade of sorts, my life for the lives of my team. As I stepped forward, my decision set in stone, the chamber seemed to react, the very ground trembling in anticipation or perhaps in warning. The guardian halted, and for a moment, time itself seemed to pause. It considered me, its gaze piercing through to the very core of my being. And in that gaze, I felt a flicker of humanity, or perhaps the remnants of the Pharaoh's soul, trapped within his own creation, understanding the weight of sacrifice. The conclusion of my story is one I tell with a heavy heart, for the cost of our intrusion was great. But know this, the secrets of the Pharaoh's tomb are not meant for the world of the living. They belong to the shadows and the spirits that dwell within, and to the guardian, who watches over the last slumber, eternally vigilant, eternally bound. We emerged from the Pharaoh's crypt, the blazing sun of the desert unable to warm the chill that had settled deep within our bones. The team, once vibrant with the thrill of discovery, now moved with the hollowed gauntness of those who have gazed into the abyss and felt its stare in return. The price of our curiosity had been steep. I alone bore the unseen scars of my encounter with the guardian, the weight of the knowledge that I had faced something unfathomable and ancient, and had barely escaped its grasp. The memory of its eyes, burning with the light of 1,000 suns, would be forever etched into my mind. In the days that followed, as we attempted to stitch together the fragments of our expedition for the eager ears of the world, I found myself at a loss. How could I explain the unexplainable? How could I convey the depth of darkness and terror that lay within that tomb, guarded by a being that defied death and time? The whispers of the desert wind seemed to carry the laughter of the Pharaoh, a sound mingled with the desolate cries of the guardian, forever bound to protect a dead king's pride. The world would not understand, could not comprehend the forces we had awakened in our ignorance and hubris. As I put pen to paper, chronicling the events that had transpired, I chose to obscure the truth behind the veil of fiction. Let them believe it was but a tale to chill the blood, a horror story to share in the flickering light of a campfire. The reality was far too dreadful to unleash upon an unsuspecting world. The truth remains buried within me, as it should remain buried within the sands of Egypt. For some secrets are not meant to be unearthed. Some slumbers not to be disturbed. The guardian of the Pharaoh's tomb had taught me this: there are fates far worse than death, and there are guardians far more fearsome than any creature of flesh and blood. And so, I write this account as a warning cloaked in narrative, a tale of warning to those who would follow in our footsteps. Seek not the Pharaoh's tomb, for its curse is real, its guardian ever watchful. And as for those who lie in the final sleep, let them rest undisturbed, in peace and in shadow, for eternity.